All at once, the Ferengi's ears curled back. Someone behind him. Quark spun abruptly, intending to dive to the floor and let whatever it was shoot Odo instead of himself. Jake Sisko stood in the med-lab doorway, staring at them as if they were ghosts. Molly O'Brien clutched his hand, silent and white as death. Molly grabbed Jake's legs, hid behind them, and Jake put his hand protectively on her head, just as his father would.
Odo and Quark, how did you two survive? And where were you? People were looking all over the station for you.
Odo quickly sketched the events of the last subjective day to Jake, but he altered the story somewhat, telling the boy that the device activated itself without help from anyone. He needed Jake's absolute trust, which would be impossible if Jake thought either Odo or Quark was responsible for the attack on the station and for the presumed death of Benjamin Sisko, Jake's father. Odo completed the tale.
When the Bakir received the distress signal, they decided we were holding one of them hostage and demanded his release, killing all who could not answer. But that brings up an interesting question, Jake. Perhaps you can help me with this.
What?
Where are the Bakir? Where did they go and why?
Jake's eyes began to drift, as if the memory was so painful his brain would not allow him to remember. Not yet. Noticing the boy's distress, Quark asked his own question.
Jake, you haven't told us how you saved Molly. Was Nog with you then? What happened to him?
Jake blinked, returned to reality.
Oh, well, let me start back at the school 2 days ago, about 12:30.
Jake began to tell his tale. It calmed and centered him.
Nog worked the grill loose on an air duct leading out of the schoolroom. It was one of Nog's favorite ditching routes. I got Molly to climb through the hole and was just about to follow when the invaders, the Bakir, spotted us. Mrs. O'Brien jumped the guy. I've never seen anything like it. I almost ran back to help her, but I remembered Molly. Mrs. O'Brien sacrificed herself for Molly, and I couldn't let her down. I dived after Nog and Molly. Then the schoolroom blew up behind me. We crawled and crawled. Nog wanted to head toward the habitat ring, but I thought we should go to Ops. We couldn't get in. It was sealed, and I couldn't override it. I figured Nog was right after all, and we dogged to the habitat ring to hole up until the war was over. Had to dodge a bunch of Bakir patrols, but we made it.
Jake broke off telling his tale. Both he and Quark noticed that Odo was not listening. The constable stood absolutely still, forgetting even to simulate breathing.
Odo? Are you all right? Huh? Oh, yes, I was just thinking. Jake, do you remember what time it was when you heard Commander Sisko's evacuation order? We were almost done for the morning. I'd say it was about 12:30. Quark and I reappeared in the office about 10:30 this morning. How long has it been since we appeared, Quark?
The Ferengi fished out an ornate pocket watch, scrutinized it.
It's 10:30 now, and I think my watch read about 12:40 when I looked at it right after we reappeared, almost 24 hours. So, the invaders attacked the station shortly before 12:30 the day after we vanished, somewhat less than 26 hours after we disappeared. Assuming the Bakir device moves us backward in the same lump of time as it moved us forward, then if we went back right now, we'd arrive back at about 10:30 the morning of the attack. That is, your watch should sync up with the station time again. Although, the attack wouldn't have begun yet, so that means we have 2 hours to figure out how to make this blasted thing go into reverse. Odo, if we can do that, we can erase this whole last 3 days. The attack never comes. Nobody is killed. If we can figure out how to reverse the Bakir device, Quark, if we can do it in the next 2 hours, and if we can get the Bakir not to attack when we do get back.
Quark and Odo watched each other silently, each waiting for the other to make a suggestion.
Well, unless you've got some brilliant idea, Quark, This is a purely philosophical discussion. Even if the Bakir figured out a way to go back in time, which is itself pure speculation, we don't know how to do it.
Quark had the signaling device out and was studying it intently.
I think I may have an idea.
Odo snatched it away, staring at it himself.
What? How did you get this out of my pocket? Don't bother staring, Odo. It takes the cleverness of a Ferengi to deduce how to reverse this complex device.
The constable pointed at a shallow slot zigzagging across one face.
There. It looks like there's a piece missing. I'll bet if we found that missing piece, we could jump back. So, what was your idea, Quark? Never mind. So where might the piece have come from? What else was in the Cardassian strongbox, Quark? Everything was ordinary. Nothing strange or remotely shaped like that.
Odo was not listening, however. For an instant, he almost lost his form. He normally had to revert to his liquid state every 16 hours. With tremendous willpower, he could hold out somewhat longer. If they could not get back soon, Quark, Jake, and Molly would have to continue the quest alone. Of course, the attack would have already started, and many, many people would already be dead. Odo barely regained control over his rebelling molecular structure. He was still Constable Odo for a time.
Jumping forward poses no problems as far as the universe is concerned. You just found a really clever hiding place for 3 days. But jumping back, Quark, now that the Bakir would want to control absolutely. In fact, I bet you...
Quark interrupted, grasping the thought.
I'll bet the missing piece is on the Bakir, not on the device, Odo. It's probably attached to the Bakir armor itself, so even if you steal the device like the Cardassians did, you wouldn't be able to use the time reverse function unless you also got a Bakir. I was just about to say that, Quark. So where would we find a dead Bakir with a functional time reverse unit?
The pair immediately looked at each other, remembering at the same instant. Quark spoke first.
The habitat ring. A dead Bakir. Dax found a way to kill one, and it's still there.
The constable closed his eyes, visualizing the various pieces of Bakir armor.
Now, where did those blasted aliens keep that key?
One reason Odo had been so successful as an investigator was his uncanny ability to notice and remember the smallest detail. He carefully examined the sprawled body in his mind, finally focusing on the wrist braces. He remembered many little interlocking pieces.
If the key is on the armor, it's a good bet we'll find it on one of the wrist braces.
Quark ran for the door, then stopped. Odo had not moved.
Well, what are you waiting for, Odo? Instructions from Starfleet?
Odo said nothing. He pondered deeply, tugging on his chin and stretching it like putty down to chest level, like a boy stretching his chewing gum out of his mouth.
Stop that! It's nauseating! Quark, we can't make it. Can't make it? We have 3 hours! 3 hours isn't enough time to get all the way back to where Lieutenant Dax died, find the unit, then return all the way to your office. Why back to my office? Just because we jumped from there? Why, Quark? Tell me, how do you plan to activate the unit, assuming we find one? Why, I suppose I'll probe it with my... my ear pricker.
Quark gasped and clapped his hand over his mouth, while Odo finished the thought for the Ferengi.
Your ear pricker, which you cleverly dropped back in your office. Thank you, Quark. Excellent planning. We'll have to find a way to Quark's place directly, and by then we'll have no time to make it out to the habitat ring. So where do we find another Bakir body?
Molly sat down, looking sleepy. Odo and Quark both looked significantly at Jake.
I guess we'll just have to put on our memory caps, eh, Quark?
Jake spoke up, either not noticing the significance of Odo's remark or pretending not to notice. I can get you to Quark's place. Nog and I used to explore the access corridors all the time. The ones in and out of Quark's in particular.
Lead the way, lad. Quark and I will follow.
Jake coaxed Molly to her feet, then led them as hurriedly as he could in the darkness.
Jake, I wonder if you could tell me what happened to my nephew.
Jake was silent for many steps, then finally answered. Nog died, Quark. The Ferengi said nothing. I guess he died in an un-Ferengi way, but he saved my life and Molly's. The Bekir spotted us and Nog took off. He led them away, let us escape. He was my friend, Quark. He did you proud. After Jake finished, neither Quark nor Odo said a word. There was nothing to say. In a way that Quark could not explain even to himself, he understood his nephew's actions. He spoke at last.
He must have spent too much time around humans. But there are times when even Ferengi can be heroic.
Jake led them to a grill 2 meters above the deck. Stretching, the boy unsnapped it from the hatch, laid it on the deck. He hesitated a moment, then cupped his hands to give Quark a leg up. Once the three were crawling, Jake in front, followed by Molly, Odo, and Quark, the constable spoke as offhandedly as he could.
So, Jake, do you have any idea where the Bekir are now? Did they leave?
They're all gone.
That's a bit vague, isn't it? Did they leave the station?
Not exactly. Quark had an awful thought.
Odo, you don't think they could have used their devices, do you? It's possible. It would account for their disappearance. Jake, did they simply vanish?
No, I'm pretty sure most of them are dead. Odo hesitated a long time before asking his next question. But Jake seemed stronger than he had when they first met.
Jake, what happened to your father?
The boy said nothing.
Is there anyone else alive on the station that you've seen besides us?
No.
Then your father must be...
He's not dead. Jake immediately reached back and soothed Molly, who had begun crying. Odo ceased the interrogation, which was going nowhere anyway. Later, he decided. At last they reached their destination, the point they had started from so many hours ago, Quark's place. Jake squirmed around, kicked the grating until it wrenched free from the hatch. He lightly hopped down into the casino, then helped Molly. Odo and Quark followed. Inside his office, the Ferengi found everything as he had left it. He stopped, picked up the ear pricker from where he had dropped it.
All set. Now all we need is the key.
Odo turned to Jake Sisko.
Son, I know that it's very painful. You lost your mother in a Borg attack, and now you must face up to what happened to your father. But we must know what happened. If Commander Sisko killed the Bekir, we must find their bodies. Otherwise, we will not be able to return and avert the attack.
For a long moment, Jake stared at the deck. Only his eyelids moved, blinking rapidly. He seemed lost in a trance. I don't know how much I can remember. It's confusing.
You must try, human. Nog didn't hesitate, will you?
Molly and I hid in the air ducts and ventilation shafts. We constantly kept moving so they couldn't get a fix on us. The Bekir patrols were everywhere. God, Odo, they had us. They had DS9 under total control. Jake covered his eyes with his hands. For a moment, Odo thought the boy was crying. Then he realized Jake was simply trying to visualize how it was 2 days and 1,000 years ago. A chill crept up the spine of Commander Benjamin Sisko. He had just witnessed the out-of-control Orinoco runabout plow into its own landing dock. After fruitless attempts to raise Kira, Dax, anybody, he realized he was now alone. Everybody else was dead or dying. Worse, he had the distinct feeling that the invaders had finally figured out where Ops was and were on their way up at that very moment. He briefly considered remaining at the console, going down with the station. Then he remembered his primary duty. No invader must be suffered to leave DS9 alive. He ran to the access ladder, peered down its depths. He thought he detected steps moving in the blackness, but it could also be his imagination. The only 3 ways to leave Ops were transporting, climbing down the ladder, or using the turbolifts. The first was prevented by the invaders' damping field, the second by the imminent presence of armed invaders on the ladder, and the last by the disruptions to power conduits, junction nodes, and the wrecked turbolifts. A nascent thought tickled his brain. True, the turbolifts were disabled, but the turbolift shafts themselves might be clear. Sisko slung the last ever bag of O'Brien's specials over his shoulder. He climbed down the Ops entrance lift to the deck below, where the actual turbolift shaft began. He hurriedly pried open the closed doors of the turbolift and slid through. The doors slammed shut behind him. He looked down the dark shaft, faintly illuminated by flickering light through the door cracks. This is a long way down. Sisko began the long climb down the shaft. He clumped down level after level, the bag of highly explosive jerry-rigged phasers swinging out, then smacking back against his rump until he reached a landing where the turbo shaft changed directions. Below him, the track made a graceful, majestic turn to the horizontal, after which it spiraled around the promenade from level 9 to 11, then down to level 15. The turbolift bottomed out at level 28, still 7 levels above the fusion reactors, which were his goal. Slowly he clumped down the track, boot steps echoing hollowly inside the metal cage. He still had his last duty, the grimmest duty any commander can be called upon to perform. They must not take the station cheaply. They must not take it. Cost has to be devastating. Anything less, we've got a full-scale invasion coming. He checked the time. 0400, almost 18 hours after the invaders first approached the station. He leaned on his knees, gasping for air. Got to sacrifice the station. No choice. On the other hand, somebody had to live to warn the Federation, and the only person he could trust that he did not positively know was dead was his own son, Jake. Sisko was uncomfortably aware that this whole line of reasoning might be rationalization, just trying to find excuses to save Jake from the fate that he had decreed for everyone else, including himself. So what? So what if it is rationalization? He's my boy. I'm going to save him if I can. But how could Sisko warn his son what he was about to do without also warning the invaders? Sisko did not want to destroy the station by blowing up the photon torpedo armory, since that would also destroy all the evidence of the invasion. The only alternative was a massive electromagnetic pulse effect, which might kill the invaders, depending on how strong their armor was. There were only 5 places on DS9 where Jake would be shielded from the pulse. Ops, the central axis of DS9, or one of the 3 weapons sails. Sisko had to somehow warn his son to get to a shielded area if Jake were still alive and conscious. At the bottom of the turbolift track, he entered a cold, antiseptic cargo bay that throbbed with power from the fusion reactors, a mere 7 levels below. Finally, he found what he wanted, a hard-wired communications intercom. Now, how do I warn Jake? Never mind. Got plenty to say first. Computer, open ship-wide intercom along hard channels. He breathed deeply, carefully composing his message. At last, he began to speak.
Attention invaders. This is Commander Benjamin Sisko, commanding officer of the Bajoran and United Federation of Planets, Starbase Deep Space Nine. I hereby formally surrender this station. I direct all Bajoran militia forces to lay down their arms. This is a direct order. Further defensive operations will be considered a criminal act under the Uniform Alliance Act of Baylor II.
He waited, smiling, letting the words sink in.
As surety for safe conduct off Deep Space Nine for all crew and residents, and to ensure the cessation of hostilities on the part of the invading forces, I shall continue to hold my prisoner hostage. This prisoner was taken into custody 56 hours ago. We are holding the prisoner in a secret location which we shall not disclose until all Bajoran and Federation personnel have left the station. I am now ready to negotiate safe passage and the terms of surrender. I await your presence in the reactor pod, level 35, the lowest level in the station. You have 30 minutes to arrive. If 30 minutes pass and you have not arrived, I shall execute the prisoner.
Sisko licked his lips, and now came the warning that he prayed Jake would understand. After the Vedek Win incident, Sisko had decided to send his own son to Bajoran Sunday school classes as a goodwill gesture. Besides, he felt a dose of spiritual values might do Jake good. He prayed that Jake had actually studied his lessons.
In the name of the great god, Susurora, I pray a great enlightenment envelops us all, allowing us to settle this issue with no further blood spilled.
If Jake had paid attention, he would recognize the curious reference to a Bajoran deity. Susurora was the Bajoran god of the sun. Jake stared at the clock. 04:29. His father had made the cryptic announcement 3 minutes ago, giving Jake still another 27 minutes to figure out what he meant. It was obviously some sort of code. Jake knew his father had not suddenly converted to sun worship. Ben Sisko was desperately trying to tell his son something urgent, but Jake had no idea what it was. He continued to run through everything he knew about the Bajoran sun. A little dimmer than Sol, warmer. You can see the aurora from almost anywhere in the northern hemisphere. Big and hot surface, temperature only about 3,500 degrees. Core is several million degrees. Gigantic, continuous fusion explosion. Fusion! He's going to do something to the fusion reactors, Molly. Jake looked at his watch. The luminous display read 04:35, 21 minutes left before his father did whatever he would do. Jake wondered if his father would blow them up, make the entire station explode. But that made no sense. If that is what he was going to do, why bother warning Jake? He would die anyway. Why risk the invaders figuring it out too and somehow getting off the station or shielding themselves? No, it's something we can survive if we're smart enough. That's why Dad warned me. Jake paced, furious with himself for not being able to think. He kept looking at his watch. 12 minutes, 11 and a half, 11 minutes left. Look, this is stupid. I'm so scared I can't think. What does Dad always quote? The fear of death is the beginning of slavery. Thoughts popped into his mind, ways that a reactor could go wrong besides exploding. At once, Jake realized what his father was planning. He smacked his head so hard he staggered himself. Of course, a pulse! A huge electromagnetic pulse effect. It fries electronic equipment. Maybe it does the same to a body. Great. Now I know how we're going to die. What exactly can I do in 9 minutes to shield us? Jake suddenly had a strange thought. He squatted down, face to face with the little girl. the daughter of the Chief of Operations, Miles O'Brien.
Molly, did your daddy ever talk about shields?
Molly nodded.
Did he ever say what parts of the station have special shielding?
Molly turned her head, stared at him with eyes as big as millstones, but said nothing. Too complicated a question, he decided.
Did your daddy ever talk to you about emergencies? Did he say where you should go if the station were attacked and he wasn't with you? He told Mommy. Do you remember what he said?
Molly pondered deeply, rubbing her chin in an eerily adult-like mannerism that she must have picked up from her father.
Said to go to weepy cells. The weepy cells? Weepy cells. Wappy sails. Sails! The weapons sails! Come on, Molly, we have to run now.
The nearest weapons sail tower was above level 13. He took a last glance at his watch. 6 minutes to doomsday. Grabbing up Molly, Jake sprinted toward the access ladder.
Can you climb a ladder? Okay, you go first, Molly. I'll be right behind you.
She laboriously climbed one rung, another rung, a third rung. At last, Molly flopped over onto the deck of level 13. Jake charged up the remaining rungs, scooped the girl up in both arms, and pelted down the corridor. He skidded to a halt as he passed a small corridor branching off of the main. That was it. It had to be. He squeezed down the unmarked corridor, pushing Molly ahead of him, then rounded a corner and came to the thickest, heaviest door he had ever seen. It was locked. Stunned, Jake looked at his watch. 30 seconds. 29. 28. Commander Sisko began the long downward climb into the hottest hell that intelligent beings had yet devised, the antimatter-spiked fusion reactor chamber itself. The air was strangely still. Under the right circumstances, it could produce a solitary shockwave, a soliton, called an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, which exploded outward at light speed like a fist of electromagnetic radiation. The invader armor might partially shield them from the full effects, depending on how far away from the source they were. Thus, the closer he could lure them, the better his chances. Level after level he descended, 6 in all, to finally stand on the heavy deck plates of level 34, directly above the multi-gigawatt reactors. The deck plates contained a single gigantic trap door. It was sealed by 5 screw lugs, each the diameter of a porthole. He wrestled them loose. He sat quite still. Faintly above his head, he heard noises. The invaders had reached the end of the turbolift track, were descending the 6 ladders towards their rendezvous with fate. 5 phaser grenades left. Sisko used one to blow open the hatch. It was far too heavy to lift, at least 300 kilos. Before he could change his mind, Ben Sisko lowered himself down the Badger hole, dropped stiffly to the deck. Level 35, the fusion reaction well. The bottom terminus of DS9. He squeezed back against reactors 1 and 2, a pair of hulking but fragile eggshell cups, each containing an exploding star. Jake led Quark and Molly to the turbolift shaft. They quickly discovered that the lifts were inoperable, at least the touch plate did not glow and no turbolift arrived. His strength ebbing, the constable pried open the doors and they began the long trek down toward the fusion generators, following, if they only knew, the same route that Sisko himself had followed 2 days earlier. The atmosphere grew thinner and thinner. Small holes had been torn in the hull during the battle, and the atmospheric shield had failed when the station batteries ran down. For some reason, the fusion generators were offline. Jake, Molly, and Quark felt nauseated, their heads pounding from oxygen deprivation. By the time they reached level 32, the ladder was so hot that only Odo could hold it in his bare hands. Quark took off his jacket, gazed lovingly at it. Then he tore it into strips, which he wrapped around the hands of Molly, Jake, and himself. He did the same with his shirt. Using the slight protection, they climbed down one more ladder to level 33. There they stuck. The heat coming out from the ladder well was enough to give third-degree burns to anyone who tried to brave it, except, of course, for Odo. Jake put his body between Molly and the heat source, hoping to shield her. "I don't think we're going any deeper. Now what?" Commander Sisko watched wave after wave of invaders pour down the ladderway. He tucked the remaining phaser grenades behind his back against Reactor 2, except for one he gripped out of sight. He pressed the arm button, but did not release it. 17 hours after the attack began, it was about to end. They surrounded and filled all the space between the other cold reactors. As one motion, the invaders raised their rifles to point directly at his heart. The Inquisitor stepped forward, asked his by now tiresome, inflectionless question.
"Where is the other one like us?"
"I am holding him prisoner. He is in a safe place where you will not find him."
"What proof do you give that you are holding one of us prisoner?"
"None. Take it or leave it." The Inquisitor hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Finally, it appeared to accept the authenticity of Sisko's claim, for the moment.
"What do you require to release the captive?"
"First, what are you called? Who are you?"
"The ones who used to be here call us Bekir."
Bekir. It was a Cardassian type of badger. A nickname, not a name. "What do you call yourselves?"
"What do you require to release the captive?"
26 minutes had passed since Sisko made his broadcast. He had promised Jake 30. He could not implement Sisko's last stand for 4 more minutes. He strained his brain. What else could he demand? A wicked thought struck him. Reparations.
"What are reparations?"
"I demand we calculate the value of each person you killed in gold-pressed latinum, and you pay this bounty to Bajor and the United Federation of Planets."
"Animals have no value."
"My animals do."
"You will lead us to the captive, or you will die."
How long do I have to make a decision?
"You are allowed 30 seconds.
For 30 seconds, Commander Benjamin Sisko scowled, studying the deck plates. Every few seconds he glanced at the chronometer. The time limit expired, and he was still 45 seconds away from Jake's safe time. It might not make a difference, or it might mean Jake's life. "All right, I'll lead you there. But I just want the answer to one last question. Suppose you were in love with the Queen, and the King found out, and suppose he set you down in an arena in front of 2 doors and told you that behind one of the doors was a beautiful lady, the most beautiful courtesan in the entire kingdom, but behind the other door was a hungry, slavering tiger. The trouble is, you don't know which door leads to which fate. Now, you look up at the Queen, and by a secret sign, she indicates you should open the left door. My question is, did she indicate the door with the courtesan, thus handing you over into the arms of another woman, or did she indicate the door leading to the tiger, deciding she would rather see you dead than with another? In other words, if you open the door she indicated, Does it lead to the lady or the tiger? For a second, the Bakir Inquisitor froze, realizing it had been had. In that instant, Commander Sisko released the button on the phaser grenade. The explosion detonating the remaining 3 phaser grenades, which blew apart so violently they instantaneously disrupted the force shield surrounding the 2 reactors. An instant was all that was necessary. The sudden pulse of electromagnetic radiation, uncontained for the briefest nanosecond, expanded outward at light speed through the entire station and the Bakir ship. Every unshielded person on Deep Space Nine died the moment the pulse passed through his or her body, convulsing them like an epileptic seizure. Even the Bakir ship was devastated by the pulse wave. The few surviving crew managed to pilot the ship back into the wormhole, using visual navigation alone, for their electronics were obliterated. And Jake and Molly, huddled against the door to the weapons sale control room, waiting, not knowing they were now the only living beings left on board DS9. Quark tried to speak, but could only wheeze.
Oh, it was you who arranged the bodies.
Jake nodded. Odo, if all that Dad did was interrupt the force shield for a moment to let a single pulse through, why is it so horribly hot? For a single moment, Jake, there were 2 exposed, uncontained fusion reactions occurring in the chamber directly below us. They superheated the air to around 8,000 degrees. Jake put his hands over his eyes. No, stop it. Jake, if there were anything left of Commander Sisko before the containment shield broke, there is nothing left now. Of course, we have no idea whether the Bakir armor itself can survive that much heat, or whether the Bakir time key can live through an electromagnetic pulse. For a solid minute, Jake clenched his teeth, as if about to explode. Finally, his muscles softened. Well, how did we survive? We never did get into the weapons sale. Quark looked at Jake.
You have the luck of a Ferengi. You were shielded by the lower sail. You were standing in its shadow.
Odo pondered the death of Commander Sisko, as well as the few other people that Odo might have called friend. Sisko, Dax, Kira, Bashir, Keiko, O'Brien. Even Nog's sacrifice materially contributed to the one chance they had to avert the tragedy. Each brave death was actually a small triumph. Together, the triumphs added up to a possibility. A 50-50 shot. It was all they could hope for. They had been given a chance to undo what had been done. Odo stood shakily. He would not allow this magic moment to be lost by his own weakness. Despite the fact that he could barely even hold his shape, he knew what he had to do. I'm going down. There are Bakir bodies down there. He stepped to the ladder, then stopped. He handed Quark the data clip of Dr. Bashir's final log entry. Guard this evidence, Quark. The heat would destroy it. Quark nodded dully, started to stick it in his pocket, then realized he was shirtless. Embarrassed, he tucked it in his boot. Odo waded through the energy swamp and descended smartly into hell. The 8,000-degree sodium silicon bath was so bright that normal visible light and infrared were both useless. Odo reabsorbed his head into the main mass of body. He stepped off the ladder onto the deck itself, guessing that he walked on the actual inner side of the hull of DS9. The normal deck must have melted long ago. With every step, he felt slightly less massive. With a sick feeling, he understood that some part of his living substance was frying, sticking to the ultra-hot hull, then pulling loose from his feet as he walked, leaving literal footsteps behind. He staggered to the right, lowering his hands to brush along the deck in a sweeping search. Odo felt his molecules begin to come apart, as when he liquefied for the evening, but 100 times as strong. He was going to discorporate in about 3 minutes. It would mean his death, of course. Neither Quark nor Jake Sisko could possibly enter the chamber to collect the melted shapeshifter. He shuffled forward and bumped into a pile of Bakir armor, scattering it. Frantically, he slapped at the ground. At last, he found a wrist brace. Sliding his hand down the piece, he discovered the slot, the key. He extruded tentacles that wriggled under the key and pried it loose. Odo rose, reeling. Disoriented, he careened across the floor in the direction he had come. Inferno! Odo's ape-like arms banged against the white-hot ladder, wrapping around it. He shambled up the ladder, knowing only that he must exit hell immediately or be condemned to spend all eternity. At the top, the boiling thing that Odo had become flopped forward, splatting onto the upper deck like sewage. Purgatorio. It humped toward the second ladder like a gastropod, flowed like boiling molasses up and up, then turned a horizontal corner and found itself in Paradiso. It rolled forward, became a jelly, then a thin, bubbling puddle. At the rim of the puddle rested a wafer-thin Bakir key. Quark nearly scooped the key into his greedy hands before remembering that it would probably burn a hole right through them. He fumbled out his pocket watch, 12:10, a scant 20 minutes left. Hunting around, Quark found a high-temperature vacuum and bucket labeled for cleaning up sodium spills, as well as a pair of tongs. He carefully vacuumed the constable, emptying the contents into the bucket. He carefully plucked the belt buckle from his pocket and laid it on the deck, as far from the hellish hole as he could get. Then, shielding his eyes from the worst of the heat, he picked up the tiny key with the tongs. Quark gently shifted the key toward the belt buckle. By the time he got there, his face and arms were burned a bright red. Carefully, he pressed the key home. Quark grabbed the bucket of Odo and ran back to the belt buckle. Gritting his crooked pointy teeth, the Ferengi plucked the ear pricker from his pocket.
You'd better leave, human. I don't know how far this thing's field extends.
Jake smiled. I hope the next time I see you, it'll be when you're throwing me and Nog out of Quark's place again.
Goodbye, boy. You remind me a lot of your father.
Do you really think so? Together, Jake and Molly climbed up the ladder. Quark gingerly probed the belt buckle with the ear pricker. He twisted the vortex, wrenching it to full field break. Deep Space Nine rolled beneath Quark, throwing him to the ground. His stomach felt as if someone had grabbed it and flipped it over for a joke. He blinked, found himself lying on a cool deck, still on level 33. He crawled to the ladderway, peered down. The trap door to the reactor well was firmly shut. Quark stood, sucking in great drafts of air, flooding his brain and body with the needed oxygen. Then he checked the watch, 12:24. He climbed up and up, 6 levels, finally reaching level 28 where the turbolift shaft began. He slapped the control pad, then danced in impotent fury, shaking his fists while the turbolift delayed. At last it creaked into view. Quark jumped aboard.
Ops, hurry!
Quark's pocket watch now read 12:36. The turbolift doors opened, and Quark lurched into Ops, filthy, shirtless, and carrying a bucket of boiling constable. The entire crew stared, and Quark gaped right back. The last time he had seen them, they were shot full of holes.
You're alive!
Kira's mouth fell open.
No, Quark. We all joined the Prophets an hour ago. Now get the hell off Ops. We have a real emergency here.
Quark looked at the view screen. A strange ship hovered menacingly, vicious-looking barrels extending from its battle-scarred hull.
The Bakir! They're already here! Sisko, you have to let me speak to the Gamma Quadrant aliens. Why must I? Because I've just come back from the future, and if you don't, they'll attack the station and kill everyone except me and Odo.
Quark suddenly realized that a half-naked Ferengi swinging a boiling pail and babbling about time travel was perhaps not the most credible witness. Kira turned to Cisco.
He's drunk. Permission to eject the Ferengi? Do you want a lap full of hot Odo? Yes, Kira. Eject the Ferengi. Wait! They're called Bakir. Ask them whether they're Bakir.
Quark approached the lovely Lieutenant Dax. The last time he had seen her, she had a bullet hole in her forehead. He poked her shoulder.
Ow!
Iron fingers seized Quark's ear. Kira dragged him toward the turbolift. Quark moaned and rolled his eyes, almost spilling his bucket of Odo.
Ooh!
Kira abruptly remembered that Ferengi ears were erogenous zones. She let go, gagging.
Quark, you miserable little...
The flat, inflected voice from the comm link startled Quark.
Your minute has expired. Surrender your prisoner or be destroyed.
Please be patient. We are still trying to get information on the prisoner. Quark, what do you know about this? Just ask them if they're called Bakir.
Cisco pursed his lips, finally nodded, and Dax restored the line.
Do the Cardassians call you Bakir?
The ones who used to be here call us Bakir. Prepare to be boarded.
Please, wait a moment. I think we may be able to locate your prisoner.
Cisco advanced menacingly on the shirtless Ferengi.
All right, Quark, you have 3 seconds to explain. Odo and I...
He suddenly realized how preposterous it all would sound with just his unsupported word. Suddenly, his face lit up.
Yes, I do have something.
Quark sat heavily, began tugging in a frenzy at his boot, where he had put the data clip of Bashir's log. Kira gasped, finally found her voice.
Cisco, the son of a bitch is stripping. Where's that damned phaser?
Quark hallooed, held aloft the medical log. He hopped to the nearest console, jammed the clip into the input slot.
Here, I'll prove I was in the future, in an alternate timeline. Observe!
Dramatically, he thumbed the control pad. The log began to play back. Cisco, Kira, and Dax watched, mesmerized for a moment. Quark fast-forwarded to the death scene, and all 3 members of the audience jumped satisfactorily at the gunshots. The audio line hummed.
The time allotted for animals is ended. Prepare to be boarded.
Shields up, Dax.
Quark looked imploringly at Cisco.
Please, I know who they are and what they want. Just let me talk to them. The shields won't work.
O'Brien shouted from his engineering well.
They've put a shield around the station. It's stopping subspace communications.
Cisco took a deep breath.
All right, let the Ferengi try.
Dax pressed a touchpad, gestured semi-mockingly at Quark.
Bakir, wait! I know why you're here. You received a signal, right? A distress call.
We received a signal from a Bakir captive.
No, you received a signal from me.
There was a long, pregnant pause. Nobody spoke. Everyone watched Quark in amazement.
How did animals obtain a Bakir signaling device?
I bought it. It was locked in a Cardassian box. Here, this is it.
Quark fumbled for the belt buckle, held it up for the Bakir to see.
I accidentally activated it 25 hours and 42 minutes ago. Does that match your records?
The Bakir froze motionless. After a moment, it began moving again.
We are persuaded to investigate. You will hand over the device.
Gladly.
Quark shuddered as he scuttled forward, placing the device on the transporter pad.
O'Brien, get rid of the damn thing.
The chief nodded, and the belt buckle discorporated. The Bakir ship rotated 180 degrees, fired its engines, and disappeared back into the wormhole. Dax spoke cheerily.
Closed communication. I can see that, old man.
Quark collapsed into an empty chair. 26 hours of torment, guilt, and terror, released in a single moment into delicious lassitude. Perhaps it was time to visit his own holodeck suites? Quark was summoned back to reality by Sisko's stern voice.
Explain yourself, Quark. What were you doing sending an unauthorized signal through the wormhole?
The Ferengi sighed.
I refuse to answer until I can consult with my council. And who precisely is your council?
Quark held up the bucket, grinned nastily.
Constable Odo. He's the hottest property around these days.
He continued to grin. It would take at least 2 or 3 days for Odo to cool down enough to reassemble. 2 or 3 days with no Odo poking around his affairs. If Quark had not been so exhausted, he would have leaped in the air and tugged on his ears. In 3 days, Quark decided, he would own Deep Space Nine. He blinked, abruptly brought back to Earth. Kira gazed speculatively, arms folded in Odo-like fashion.
Did you ever notice that when you're naked, you look just like a plucked Tortura bird?
Quark blushed pink, wrapping his arms around his chest. He sprinted for the turbolift. He realized to his horror that the only route to Quark's place was right through the heart of the promenade.
You'll pay for this, all of you. It'll be 3 days of Ferengi heaven.
Odo actually took 4 days to cool, not 3. Incredibly, Major Kira made it her business to ride herd on Quark practically every minute of every one of the 4 days. On the 4th day, a Bornic trader was trying to sell Quark a cargo hold of some native Klingon plant, Turak Tai, used in shamanic rituals. 10 bars of gold-pressed latinum to buy the lot, and the rest would be pure profit. Major Kira suddenly materialized at the bar, listening in rapt attention as Quark and the Born haggled. They stared at her.
Oh, don't mind me. Just go on with what you were doing.
Was not doing no thing.
The Born slid down off the stool and waddled out into the promenade. Quark let his face fall into his arms. After a long time, he looked up again. Kira was still before him, smiling vapidly. At that moment, Odo stormed into Quark's place. As soon as Kira saw him, she waved a cheery goodbye and motored off to Ops. The constable walked straight up to Quark, demanded to know every single thing that had happened since he climbed into the reactor well. Back in his office, Quark told the tale, embellishing his own role only the merest bit. When he finished, the constable stared at the Klingon clock.
What a peculiar ending. Quark ends up saving Deep Space Nine, in a sense.
In a sense, Odo, every single human, Ferengi, and Bajoran on board owes his life to me. Me! I haven't received the slightest bit of gratitude from anyone.
Have you told anyone, Quark?
Of course not. Not until you and I can get our stories straight. After all, there's money to be made on this. Why, the Holovision rights alone would be astronomical.
Good, because I've decided we won't tell anyone what really happened. It would be too upsetting. It might compromise my ability to interact with the senior crew if they knew I had seen them dead.
Quark stared, utterly dumbfounded.
Not tell anyone? I, Quark, saved Deep Space Nine from absolute catastrophe? You short-sighted altruist! This story's a latinum mine.
Odo gazed upon Quark with his haughtiest look.
A catastrophe that you, Quark, brought about.
Odo, I will not pretend I wandered lost in a daze for 26 hours. I have a reputation to maintain.
All right, Quark. Go ahead.
Huh?
Tell anyone you want. But when they ask me for corroboration,
I'll tell them you were raving mad with Taraktai tea for a whole day. Taraktai tea? Oh, you did it again! You were doing it again, you damn spy!
Quark raced around the room, bent over like an old man.
What were you disguised as this time? Police brutality! I'll tell them you broke into my place without... Odo, this time you've gone too far! Quark, have you not learned yet that nothing you do escapes my attention?
For an instant, Odo's features shifted, changed into those of the Bornic captain, then back to Odo again, so quickly Quark almost missed it. He rose, descended the stairs. The promenade was unusually crowded that day.